We're watching this unfold in real time. We can't just sit back and be spectators.
Did the Oath Keepers' message die on January 6th?
Oh, it's alive and well. It's alive and well and probably evolving.
Now, extremism is coming to a town near you.
We are not subject to federal direction. We get to be free and be left alone.
He espouses that sheriffs are the highest law of the land, that they answer to no higher governmental authority.
It's wrong. The sheriff is not the highest authority.
The federal government isn't our boss.
Everybody that attends wants to find another sheriff friend to bring them with them. And I've been to 2 of them here in Texas.
I bought in.
Do you have the power then to overrule, say, the FBI?
I can make it policy to where they have to come through me.
I have a lot of questions for you. It's just trying to see if we could get an answer.
Truth really doesn't matter in these realms. Perception matters. They're putting forth the perception that they're protecting the Constitution, and it's just not true.
These are individuals that decide their own law.
It's heartbreaking to see extremism take over the community.
You don't get to read the Constitution and put your own spin on it.
They're not just stopping at the sheriff's office.
We've learned that Richard Mack is on his way out here to a secluded resort that's along the Mexican border.
Wait. You just compared the IRS to the Nazis?
To the Gestapo, yes, I said Gestapo. They are.
We may have only a very short period of time to try to stop what's happening.
The leader of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, has been convicted of seditious conspiracy in the January 6th Capitol attack. Rhodes, who is from Granbury, was on trial with 4 other Oath Keepers.
How does this small Texas town become the home of a right-wing militia leader who ends up convicted for conspiring to overturn a presidential election?
Good morning, sunshine. I'm still shocked every time I see him on TV. They say his name and he's from Granbury. And I'm like, Granbury?
Of all the places in the world. Why here?
I guess kids, you can blend in.
Linda Meyer manages a hotel just outside of Granbury, where we discovered Stuart Rhodes spent some of his nights in the months before his arrest.
I saw, just the normal average person Joe that showed no signs of any aggression or nothing.
Rhodes came to Granbury in the year before the January 6th attack, and he had friends in town. He even registered to vote using the address of a house in this neighborhood, a house once rented by the Oath Keepers' lawyer, Kelly Sorrell. Rhodes says they were dating, although Sorrell has denied that. Rhodes wasn't seen much in public, leaving some wondering who else he was hanging out with, and what happened to the anti-government movement he was building from Texas.
Nobody's just gonna go, oh, okay, leader's gone, we're done. Roll up our flag and stick it under the bed. Somebody's gonna keep that vision alive. It's just who and where.
Stuart Rhodes recruited law enforcement to join the Oath Keepers. He preached that the oath they swear to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies also means defending against what he described as the tyranny of the federal government. We found that message lives on through another group that also claims police can overrule the U.S. Supreme Court and that county sheriffs are more powerful than the FBI. It's a group founded and supported by some of Stuart Rhodes' old friends here in Granbury and beyond.
Join Oath Keepers! Oath Keepers!
Less than a year before the attack on the Capitol, Rhodes appeared at a protest against COVID restrictions in Granbury. Rhodes was there with one of his longtime friends, John Shirley.
I'm on the board of directors of Oath Keepers. We're an organization of current and former law enforcement military.
Shirley helped Rhodes found the Oath Keepers. He was one of the highest-ranking board members. He's also a law enforcement official in Granbury, an elected Hood County constable. At Stuart Rhodes' trial, prosecutors showed the Oath Keepers' bank statements were addressed to Oath Keepers at an address where Shirley lived in this gated community, according to property records. Shirley's never been charged with a crime. He says he left the Oath Keepers 6 weeks before the attack on the Capitol because he and Rhodes had different visions for the organization. Statement he made on a show hosted by right-wing conspiracy theorist Alex Jones.
And I want to be really clear. I resigned the organization on November 24, 2020. At no time on or before that date had anybody in the organization that I was aware of or involved with the organization in any way had said anything about taking on the government on January 6th. It was
Today, Shirley, who is still a county constable, posts anti-federal government messages on Facebook calling for the elimination of the FBI, which he says stands for fracking bunch of idiots. Hood County finance records show Shirley has also paid to join the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, or CSPOA, a group founded by someone else Constable Shirley knows well, retired Arizona Sheriff Richard Mack, another former high-ranking Oath Keepers board member who went on to launch the CSPOA.
The CSPOA and the Oath Keepers are promoting the same anti-government message. They're both bad, but in a stealthy way. The constitutional sheriffs have reached out to sheriffs coast to coast, and with some success.
Shirley turned up in social media photos of a CSPOA training session for law enforcement in February of 2022, held about 90 miles from Granbury. But he won't answer our questions about his ties to the CSPOA.
Hey, Constable. Scott Friedman from NBC5. How are you?
Scott, got nothing to say to you.
I have a lot of questions for you. I was just trying to see if we could get an answer to those questions. I'm trying to understand your involvement with the constitutional sheriffs. Can you tell me why you've joined that group? You spent taxpayer money to join the group, sir. I'm just trying to understand your decision to join that.
I've learned so much about the Constitution and patriotism.
In videos on the CSPOA website, Richard Mack teaches that the U.S. Constitution gives law enforcement officers powers to block the federal government, and that county sheriffs have the power to keep federal law enforcement agencies like the FBI and ATF out of their county.
The sheriff can make those agencies irrelevant in our lives, and we wouldn't have to worry about them at all.
I've taught advanced constitutional law in law school, and it's just not true.
It's insane. There's no reason that the FBI should have to seek permission to investigate federal law violations within a county.
Sorry about giving this history lesson, but the Supremacy Clause, Article 6 of the Constitution, is very clear that when there is a conflict between state, and when we say state, that includes local authorities, and the federal government shall be supreme.
On the CSPOA website, it actually says, we are a higher authority even than the President of the United States. Their view is they answer only to the Constitution, but of course it's the Constitution as they interpret it.
But this idea that may sound ridiculous to the constitutional law experts we spoke to is actually drawing a crowd of Texas law enforcement officials to hear the message. We've obtained government records, including internal law enforcement emails, showing how Richard Mack has been able to organize training sessions for law enforcement across the state. Trainings that have been supported by sheriffs, constables, prominent Texas elected officials, and even the state agency that certifies law enforcement officers.
We can't have extremists who are misstating the law for their own purposes get in and poison trainings for law enforcement. This is a national security issue. It's also a state security issue.
So we set out to see why Richard Mack has his sights set on Texas.
Texas is the state where it's growing the fastest.
And how he responds to those who say he's spreading a lie.
Tell the professor who said that he's an idiot and a liar.
It's a journey that takes us from the far corners of the Lone Star State to the Rocky Mountains.
So we're on our way to see a man who used to be a spokesman for the Oath Keepers.
None of this is new. This is all just rebranding.
And back in Stewart Road's old town, what are those so-called constitutional cops doing? Why some in Granbury fear law enforcement connected to a group that believes they're above the feds.
These people actually believe that they have that kind of power.
There has to be a point where people have to open their eyes.
The Texas Sheriff, an icon of the West, depicted in movies from John Wayne.
You can keep your guns, Colorado.
Thanks, Sheriff.
To Tommy Lee Jones.
Well, it's a mess, ain't it, Sheriff?
If it ain't, it'll do till the mess gets here.
Lawmen resisting evil and keeping the peace.
You want that gun, pick it up. I wish you would.
Does your sheriff, or do you?
But today, some Texas sheriffs are buying into a different message.
That they do not run our lives.
One that claims they have special powers to resist an evil federal government.
Who's going to protect the citizens of Texas from the weaponization of the FBI?
What I saw was it started in the Woodlands 2 years ago. Texas was ground zero.
In February of 2021, law enforcement officials gathered in this city north of Houston for a training billed as the County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, hosted by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department and the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association.
Have we gone totally insane? That's why we're having this convention.
To quote a good friend of mine, he called it a constitutional revival.
Scott Williams is the sheriff of Coryell County, Texas, near Waco. Sheriff Williams went to that CSPOA training in the Woodlands.
There were several hundred people there, a lot of sheriffs from all over.
He came home a believer in the law enforcement gospel preached by CSPOA founder Richard Mack.
The governor, the president, Congress, the state legislature, none of those groups are the boss of your sheriff.
Do you believe sheriffs are the most powerful officials, law enforcement officials in the country?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you have the power then to overrule, say, the FBI if they're coming into your county?
I can make it policy to where they have to come through me.
So if the FBI is going to come in and serve a warrant in your county, you expect that they're going to contact
Absolutely.
you first?
Absolutely.
So have you put them on notice about that?
I have spoke to them. The FBI, I have spoke with the ATF, and I have spoken with the Secret Service in the past.
Williams told us the training here in the Woodlands taught him the oath he swore to the Constitution requires sheriffs and police officers to interpose or stand between the federal government and the people of their county to make sure the feds don't violate people's constitutional rights.
Even the president himself, I'm not going to let him come violate somebody's God-given rights.
After his conversion in the Woodlands, Williams spoke on a CSPOA webcast about how he sent one of his deputies to monitor the U.S. Secret Service when they came to town to investigate someone accused of threatening House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Kind of made the Secret Service guy mad, and my deputy, said, "You're not going to violate this guy's right."
Since then, Williams has become one of the most active so-called constitutional sheriffs in Texas.
We had an actual Texas tour.
Social media photos the CSPOA posted show how Williams and his friend Gary Haven, the former CEO of the women's fitness chain Curves, have crisscrossed Texas in Haven's private plane, taking Richard Mack to CSPOA trainings. They've been held in at least 8 Texas cities, according to the photos and training records we obtained. This map, which the CSPOA circulated to sheriffs, puts dots on at least 55 counties where they say the county sheriff has attended a CSPOA training. But the number's actually higher, according to attendance logs we obtained from sheriff's departments that helped host those trainings and the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. At least 58 elected county sheriffs have attended. That's more than 20% of sheriffs in the state. And the trainings also attracted deputy sheriffs, constables, and police officers from at least 85 different law enforcement agencies.
It's taken off pretty good.
We reached out to sheriffs in counties marked on that CSPOA map to ask if they support Richard Mack's message. Most did not respond, but several told us they do believe they have powers to block the feds. Records and photos of CSPOA training events supporters have posted online show even the state's top law enforcement official, Attorney General Ken Paxton, spoke at a training in a Dallas suburb in 2021. Paxton's office would not respond to our questions about his decision to participate. Law enforcement officers who attended have even been able to receive continuing education credit from the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, which certifies police officers.
We'll get back to that because it set off alarms with people who believe the CSPOA is teaching a false and dangerous message about sheriffs blocking federal officials.
What is so terribly wrong here is that the law is being twisted and bastardized to promote a movement which puts a whole variety of federal officials at risk.
It's dangerous because this means that we have, again, people in positions of credibility, at least with a veneer of credibility, positions of power, who are essentially buying into a fraud, and other people in those communities can be victims of that.
Is this an anti-government movement?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If it was an anti-government movement, why would there be sheriffs?
Williams believes the CSPOA is just a patriotic group that supports the original meaning of the Constitution and reminds law enforcement what their oath means at a time when he feels the country is headed in the wrong direction.
But it's probably the complete distrust of our federal government has moved a lot of this.
What is it you distrust about the federal government?
Point blank, right there at the border. I mean, they're not acting with the best intentions for the people of the United States.
In a speech at a CSPOA event posted on Rumble, Williams admits he had concerns about the CSPOA when his friend, the former CEO, invited him to that first event in the Woodlands.
And I got on the internet, this Google machine thing, and I'm going to tell you, according to the internet, Sheriff Mack is the Antichrist. So, don't believe nothing of that crap. So, me being that way, I was like, man, I really don't want to go. Oh my gosh, what did I get myself into?
And I really didn't want to be part of it. I was like, I'm not an extremist by any means,
So what is convincing Williams and other Texas sheriffs they're not joining an extremist group? And what is Richard Mack's goal in Texas? We found him blazing a trail that extends way beyond recruiting just county sheriffs. We're in the Big Bend region, one of the most remote corners of Texas. We've learned Richard Mack is coming out here to a secluded resort along the U.S.-Mexico border, where he's meeting with some very influential Texas elected officials.
Some West Texas county commissioners and county judges, the highest-ranking county officials in Texas, have come here for an annual meeting, and they've invited Richard Mack to teach a short version of his class for sheriffs.
When you came to this meeting, did you want to know how the federal government could be reduced in their tyranny and their abuses? It's up to us.
Mack invited us to listen as he tells county judges and commissioners their oath means they must work with their sheriffs to protect people from unjust federal laws. He even suggests law enforcement and county officials can basically decide for themselves which laws are unconstitutional. Follow his words here.
And the question now is, who decides what is just and unjust? Only the United States Supreme Court can do that, right? Want me to tell you what that is? That is a flat-out lie.
Mack repeats that message to us after his speech.
The Supreme Court does not get to say what freedom and liberty is because they've been wrong lots of times. Lots of times.
So when you talk to people who teach constitutional law at big law schools, they say there's one problem with the theory you're teaching, that it's just not true.
Tell them to call me. I'll be glad to talk to them. Tell them to invite me to their classes. I will shame them and put them to shame.
You would shame people who teach constitutional law at major law schools.
Sure, I will.
You know more than they do.
I've debated. Why are you acting like I don't? County sheriffs are not state or federal judges that have the authority to interpret the extent of laws.
And that's actually the role of the judiciary. That's not the role of sheriffs. It is the judicial branch of the government that determines what the law is and whether the law is constitutional.
The legal experts we spoke to say the danger of teaching sheriffs and county officials that they can pick and choose which laws are constitutional is they may decide not to protect certain rights, or they may encourage people to disregard legitimate federal authorities like the FBI.
This sounds scary to a lot of people because it sounds like you're trying to undermine the credibility and the authority of federal law enforcement.
The FBI doesn't have any credibility left. Don't blame that on us. Their lack of credibility is their own fault, not ours. We're trying to protect the people from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. That hurts no one. A check and balance is what the Constitution's all about. That hurts no one except their pride. Don't tell me it's a danger. The danger is allowing the FBI to do whatever they want.
In front of the county judges, Mack also gripes about the IRS, another federal agency he sees as illegitimate.
You cannot have American liberty and an IRS Gestapo, always going after people.
Wait. You just compared the IRS to the Nazis?
To the Gestapo, yes. I said Gestapo. They are. Do you know what they do to people?
You believe the IRS is as bad as a group that killed millions of people?
They destroy everybody in their path. They're completely cruel. They're a bunch of bullies, and they're un-American, and they are the Gestapo of America.
This kind of anti-federal government rhetoric is alarming to some who know Richard Mack's history with the Oath Keepers, founder Stewart Rhodes, and a real-life standoff with the feds. So we came out here to the Rocky Mountains to talk to someone who knows a lot about Stewart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers, and their connections to the CSPOA and Richard Mack.
When I first started off with the Oath Keepers, it was as an independent journalist, embedding in, I thought would be a big story eventually, and be able to write a novel about it. I got lost along the way.
Jason Van Tatenhove, seen in these 2016 photos, eventually became the Oath Keepers' national media director, but he left shortly after the pictures were taken as he grew concerned about the group's direction.
I saw firsthand this radicalization happening, and
I can tell you that they may not like to call themselves a militia, but they are.
Jason testified to the January 6th committee in Congress, describing what he saw.
They're a violent militia, and they are largely Stewart Rhodes.
Jason first joined the Oath Keepers at the infamous standoff at the Bundy Ranch in 2014, where Stewart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers teamed up with Richard Mack and his constitutional sheriffs.
How Richard Mack had suggested during the standoff to put the women and children up front to almost use as human shields.
We were actually strategizing to put all the women up at the front. If they're going to start shooting, it's going to be women that are going to be televised all across the world getting shot by these rogue federal officers.
Mack and Rhodes were answering the Bundy family's call to help stop federal agents from seizing their cattle. The Bundys refused to pay fees for grazing cattle on federal land, saying they didn't recognize the authority of the federal government. Dozens of armed supporters turned out, setting up a dangerous confrontation with the feds.
And that was kind of a bug lamp for a variety of anti-government extremists that showed up.
And the federal government, in fact, backed down during that because they had sniper rifles trained on federal agents.
A federal judge later dismissed charges against the Bundys, saying prosecutors withheld evidence, a move that some believe emboldened militia groups that turned out at the ranch. Mack has said the sheriffs showing up to oppose the feds helped bring a peaceful resolution. But looking back, Jason says the standoff should have been an early warning of how far Rhodes and Mack were willing to go to resist federal authorities while saying they were defending the Constitution.
And I think it's a lesson to be learned that we can't just dismiss what's happening because we think it's crazy or, it's never really going to get anywhere. We have to take these things seriously.
Richard Mack told us he's never advocated violence and that he left the Oath Keepers because he disagreed on where the group was headed.
The head of the Oath Keepers.
Stewart Rhodes?
Stewart Rhodes. I think he's still a good man. He told me that they were doing stuff, and I said, that sounds like a militia. And he says, what's wrong with being a militia? I said, our bylaw said we're not. And he says, it's time we became one. And I said, I can't go there.
But Jason Van Tatenhove believes Richard Mack's current message still poses a threat.
None of this is new. This is all just rebranding.
He believes Mack is just following the old playbook of anti-government groups that want to diminish or disregard the authority of the federal government so they can replace it with their own kind of government.
That allows you to kind of set up your own culture and community separate from, the powers that be that we have as a country.
He worries the CSPOA is quietly normalizing an anti-government message among local law enforcement.
The more that they can gleam onto and associate themselves with people in positions of power and authority, those traditional archetypal positions like the county sheriff, the more they're going to get people to just go along with what they're trying to do.
Remember, Richard Mack has already been able to attract police and sheriffs from 85 different agencies to his trainings. So who are the sheriffs who supported those events? I wanted to come out just to give you a chance to explain this constitutional sheriff stuff.
I don't have anything to explain about it, Scott.
And why does the state of Texas allow officers to get credit for attending training that seems to send a false message about the law? Our questions have prompted a state investigation, as some sheriffs are now speaking out against what they heard from Richard Mack.
It's kind of dangerous when you want to start deciding which laws you want to enforce.
Along the side of a highway in Austin, there's this nondescript office building that's home to a powerful state agency, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, or TCOL. TCOL is supposed to make sure police, sheriffs, and constables have proper training. That includes continuing education classes required for law enforcement to keep their state licenses. There are classes on everything from crisis intervention to crime scene investigation. And for the last 2 years, TCOL has even awarded continuing education credit for a constitutional law class known as the County Sheriff America's Last Hope, taught by former Arizona Sheriff Richard Mack, who tells sheriffs they outrank the FBI and even the President of the United States.
TCOL's endorsement of our training was really great.
You feel like TCOL's really given you a stamp of approval?
Yeah, they have. I mean, if they didn't approve it, they would have stopped it.
He's very opportunistic, and he, every inch that someone gives him, he will use to go the next mile.
Mark Pitcavage is with the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, Center on Extremism. The ADL and IREHR, another group that tracks extremists, wrote to TCOL in July of 2021, basically asking, why would you give credit for this class? The ADL warned TCOL Richard Mack is a former sheriff who has a long history of anti-government extremism, including being one of the founding members of the Oath Keepers.
We expressed our concern about TCOL essentially endorsing this extremist coming in and being able to talk to law enforcement officers and propagandize to law enforcement officers and them getting credit for it.
So TCOL responded by sending field agents to observe Mack's trainings in Burnett County and Houston County.
They actually sent a couple of spies to our training to make sure that it was copacetic with their goals and that it was good. And they said there's nothing wrong with the CSPOA training.
We obtained an email Mack's national executive assistant sent to Texas sheriffs celebrating TCOL's decision, saying, "Hallelujah, TCOL didn't back down." The ADL still wonders what TCOL was thinking.
I don't know if they just did not know enough about Richard Mack or know enough about the fact that his theories have no basis in law, Texas state law or federal law or constitutional law.
So we wondered, what did those TCOL spies, as Mack called them, really consider when they visited his classes? We requested TCOL records and obtained the 2 short evaluations the field agents wrote. One reported there were about 100 people in attendance and said he heard no negative or derogatory comments made or provided about any segment of society. Another field agent wrote, in all, the class was a study of the law and making sure law enforcement, particularly sheriffs, were following their oath, standing up for and protecting individual rights. But neither evaluation addresses whether the legal information Mack shared was accurate or whether he's qualified to teach constitutional law.
Richard Mack is not a constitutional expert. He's not an attorney. Why would you do this?
T. Cole's interim executive director, John Beecham, turned down several requests for an interview. In an email, a spokesperson for the agency told us, generally speaking, trainings, with the exception of courses required by the Texas legislature, are not reviewed or approved by T. Cole to be eligible for credit. Instead, T. Cole left it up to the county sheriff's departments who sponsor Mack's trainings to validate his credentials and the course material.
If T. Cole is not there to help establish some sort of measures of standards for law enforcement training in Texas, why do they even exist?
We also asked sheriff's departments who helped host Mack's trainings for his lesson plans, which T. Cole says departments must keep on file. But many departments sent us this note from Richard Mack instead, saying CSPOA is a private company and cannot disclose lesson plans or presentation materials. 3 sheriff's departments did send us some course handouts from Mack's training. One is a CSPOA resolution that declares constitutional sheriffs will not tolerate federal agents making any arrest of citizens or seizure of persons or property without first notifying and obtaining the express consent of the local sheriff. The other is a letter a constitutional sheriff in Washington state wrote to the U.S. Attorney General warning him the FBI or any other federal agency needs to stay out of our county. Is that the message that you're pushing in these trainings?
The message is that we put federal and state bureaucrats on notice that they will not be allowed unfettered access to the people in our counties. With their records of criminal activity and political weaponization, every sheriff in the country should do that.
In his trainings, Mack also hands out this booklet.
This is a highlighted version of my Supreme Court case.
In the 90s, he was one of a handful of sheriffs that sued the federal government over enforcement of the Brady gun bill. The case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court ruled that the federal government cannot essentially commandeer state law enforcement officials like sheriffs and force them to administer a federal regulatory program.
The federal government cannot mandate that state officers enforce a federal regulatory scheme. That's all that it's about. It says nothing about sheriffs or other state officers being able to determine for themselves what's a constitutional law and what's not a constitutional law.
This was not a landmark case dealing with the limitations of the federal government.
This decision is the most powerful 10th Amendment state sovereignty decision in the history of our country.
Mack teaches that the ruling essentially gives sheriffs broad power to block any federal action they see as unconstitutional.
He likes to use that to suggest that it means more than it does.
So we went back to T. Cole and asked them about Mack's training handouts and the comments he made to us. T. Cole sent us a statement saying, after a review of the information you have provided, T. Cole is opening an investigation related to the referenced events and course content. They said the agency would also look at its procedures for accrediting trainings. How helpful has that T. Cole credit been to spreading the message?
I think very helpful. It kind of legitimizes this thing that we're doing here.
With help from Sheriff Scott Williams, the trainings spread from one event in Montgomery County near Houston to trainings in Coryell County, Bosque, Brown, Burnett, Houston County, Victoria, Wichita, and even Dallas County, where Sheriff Terry Garrett from neighboring Rockwall County helped put on a training in Mesquite. CSPOA photos show Garrett on stage there with a George Washington impersonator. Garrett turned down requests for an on-camera interview. We caught up with him at a community event. Scott Friedman from NBC5, good to see you.
Yeah.
I wanted to come out just to give you a chance to explain this constitutional sheriff stuff
I don't have anything to explain about it, Scott.
He told us his department helped host Richard Mack's training to see what other local sheriffs would think about it.
There are a lot of trainings over the years that we've gone to that you may not agree with everything that the organizer or the speaker has to say, but you can learn something from anything.
Do you agree with Richard Mack, with his theories?
I'm not a follower of Richard Mack.
Garrett's email records show a former sheriff warned him about the CSPOA in 2021, saying, "I'm just leery of that group. Richard Mack is too radical for me." But Garrett still attended the CSPOA training in the Woodlands, then helped support Mack's training in Mesquite. He told us he did not know Mack was once a high-ranking member of the Oath Keepers.
Not until you told me that. So.
Had you known that, would you have had some second thoughts?
It may have affected some things, but like I said, I think it's important that whether it's the sheriffs or whether it's chiefs or anybody else in the area, what they know, what messages are out there.
Would you host him again for an event here?
I don't know. We'd have to see what it brings. What value it brings to your officers, your deputies, your sheriffs.
T-Cole records show one sheriff, Trace Hendricks from Bosque County, has received state credit for attending 3 CSPOA trainings, including one in his county. Email records show the CSPOA included Hendricks in discussions about planning that event, but when we contacted him, he also distanced himself from the CSPOA.
What I'm trying to understand, Sheriff, is how you got involved in helping this group spread this message. Over the phone, Hendricks said he helped introduce some speakers at the event and didn't really help plan it. He says he's not into a lot of these things that they're teaching. He does not believe that sheriffs are the highest law enforcement authority in the country. The way he's describing this, it was really the continuing education credits that kept him coming back, where he went to 2 of these trainings and then helped with a 3rd. 2 Texas sheriffs who attended the trainings told us they had real concerns about what they heard. Collin County Sheriff James Skinner told us he cut the meeting short and left after the lunch hour at the Mesquite training. I didn't agree much with what was being said and certainly did not care for the negative comments by former Sheriff Richard Mack directed at sheriffs who might disagree with his view of what duties and obligations that a sheriff has under both our U.S. and state constitutions.
It's kind of dangerous when you want to start deciding which laws you want to enforce.
Angelina County Sheriff Greg Sanchez told us at the training he attended in Houston County, Richard Mack encouraged sheriffs to stop enforcing seatbelt laws, which courts have ruled are constitutional.
He really pushed, that he didn't agree with that, with that law, about the seatbelt law, that it was a violation of constitutional freedoms of people. Once you start doing that, you're getting in a dangerous area, and then because then you start thinking, okay, well, what about this other law or whatever it may be? I won't enforce that one either, and I don't agree with that. And then you just start enforcing whatever you want to. And that's not right. I mean, to me, it's not right. We have a checks and balance system in this country.
But other sheriffs and police officers have embraced the message. T-Cole course evaluation forms we obtained show many who attended thought it was a, quote, great class. One sheriff wrote they wanted more examples of cases where sheriffs took on the federal government. Another chief deputy sheriff wrote the training provides information on how to respond to federal intrusion into our county. After Sheriff Randy Hargrove from Houston County attended the Woodlands event, he went on a CSPOA webcast to say every sheriff should hear the message.
And this thing is spreading. It's a fire that just keeps growing.
We reached out to the rest of the 58 elected county sheriffs who attended the trainings. Only a handful responded. Several indicated they agree with Richard Mack's teaching.
Shackelford County Sheriff Ed Miller wrote, the elected sheriff of a county is responsible for protecting the citizens of their county from the unconstitutional overreach of all local, state, and federal agencies. The FBI and other federal agencies are not peace officers in the state of Texas. They're only federal agents.
But what the sheriffs don't know is all that crazy rhetoric undermines their own institution as well.
I've been investigating extremism since the beginning of my career with the FBI. My name is Eric Jackson. I'm the special agent in charge of the Dallas FBI.
Eric Jackson used to run the FBI's Dallas office.
If I have a sheriff telling me where I can and can't operate with baseless authority to do that, it would cause a lack of trust.
Jackson says federal law enforcement may hesitate to share information with sheriffs who seem to oppose the federal government, and that could hurt cooperation on real safety issues.
And I've worked with so many incredible sheriffs. I mean, people who do incredible things. Not one of those sheriffs has ever told me that they're the most powerful law enforcement person in the state. And what I would say is, you have to speak up, because you can't let the few ruin the reputation of the many.
He fears sheriffs who think they can interpret the Constitution themselves might choose to protect only the rights of those who support them.
What extremism does is it works to separate the community by sections. And then after it's separated the community by sections, its next goal is to punish those that are not like them.
Some fear it could happen in the town that was once the Oath Keepers' home base.
I have tried to convince these people that this is not the way it works.
Constables who seem to have aligned themselves with the constitutional sheriffs are now wading into a cultural battle that split the town.
This idea of law enforcement almost becoming these activists, right, to push a certain agenda forward. You've got to step up and say, this isn't okay.
That's what you've got in your library. That's what you've got, y'all. It's in your library, y'all.
In Granbury, Texas, school board meetings have become a battleground.
Thank you, Miss Brown. I'll go. I'm sorry about the decisions y'all are making. It's pretty sad to watch. It is disgusting, I agree.
An outspoken group has called for the removal of library books they call pornographic. And the man in the green sweatshirt, Hood County Constable John Shirley, has cheered them on.
We'll take care of that this time next year.
Constable Shirley is a former high-ranking leader of the Oath Keepers and a member of the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, which teaches law enforcement they can essentially decide themselves which laws are constitutional.
In May of 2022, Shirley took aim at the Granbury School District's library books on a local conservative talk show.
Trust me, GISD, the wave is coming, so I suggest you get out in front of this and get those books out of the library today.
He also suggested crimes may have been committed by people who served on school committees that decided to keep some of the controversial books on the shelves.
The non-educator members of those committees who voted to put those books back in the school, guess what, buddy? Think about it. You may have just broken the law.
The day after that program posted on YouTube, two women Shirley has publicly supported in the book debate filed a police report with a different Hood County Constable's office, alleging there's pornography in the school libraries. In Hood County, the 4 constables' offices typically serve court papers and handle evictions more often than criminal investigations. But in this case, a Chief Deputy Constable, Scott London, started a criminal investigation into the school library books. Can you talk about the status of that investigation at all?
Only to say it's an active investigation. Until it's complete, we can't discuss it.
London moved to Granbury in 2019. He was once the sheriff of Eddy County, New Mexico, where he developed a reputation as a constitutional sheriff. In 2022, he appeared at a CSPOA training near Granbury with John Shirley, according to social media photos London posted and training records we obtained. In an interview, London indicated his book investigation was simply a response to the complaint he received from the 2 citizens.
If a crime is reported to any law enforcement agency, I would expect the law enforcement agency to investigate the crime.
But the women who filed the report, Monica Brown and Karen Lowry, who was recently elected to the Granbury School Board, told us it was Constable London who suggested they file a police report after he heard them speak about the books at a local Republican club meeting. In an email, Lowry told us Constable London initiated the contact with us and brought up the potential criminal violations. I did not consider a criminal charge as the objective and never attempted to contact the police. Constable London asked if we would be the complainant on the original report. Monica and I agreed to do so, believing we should support law enforcement. Brown told us she agrees with Lowry's statements to us.
So we reached back to Constable London to ask about this. He acknowledged he did contact Brown after hearing her speak at that Republican club meeting. He told us after reviewing the pornography statute with Brown and Lowry, they believed there was a case and filed the report.
This idea of law enforcement almost becoming these activists, right, to push a certain agenda forward. you've got to step up and say, this isn't okay.
Chris Tackett, a former Granbury School Board member, and his wife Mindy say they've been stunned to see constables wade into the book debate, making public comments, even launching a criminal case.
It is an unfortunate and frightening thought to think that it's even on the table.
Right, that our law enforcement is taking these kinds of claims seriously and willing to participate in the intimidation of public school librarians.
The Tacketts don't believe there's any porn in the libraries. They point out these book debates have raged across Texas since Governor Greg Abbott issued a directive asking state education officials to investigate reports of pornographic books. Abbott's request came after a conservative state lawmaker, Matt Krause, put out a list of more than 800 books he wanted investigated. But that Krause list alarmed some civil rights advocates who said many of the books on the list are about gay, lesbian, transgender, and minority characters.
Most school districts around the state saw the proclamation and saw the Krause list and said, we don't have porn in our libraries, we're not doing this, right? We're not playing this game.
The Tacketts acknowledge some of the books have content that may be challenging or upsetting to some people, but they point out the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled school boards can't remove books from libraries simply because some in the community don't like certain scenes or ideas in those books. But the Tacketts say they wonder if the U.S. Supreme Court's voice will be heard by law enforcement officials tied to a group that believes they can decide for themselves what the Constitution says.
I mean, just the act of going through that process, right? I mean, it's sending signals.
It's an intimidation.
In an interview, Constable London told us he believes law enforcement can choose not to follow federal laws or directives they personally deem to be unconstitutional.
When there is a clear and blatant conflict between a law or an order and the Constitution, we took an oath to the Constitution, and that comes first. Hello, folks.
On social media, London has posted videos teaching local law enforcement the Constitution gives them power to block federal officials.
I'm not one of those crazy overthrow the government anarchist types. But it is a legitimate question to ask. What do you do when your government doesn't follow its own rules?
In this video, he suggests local police can use trespassing laws to arrest federal agents if the local police believe the feds are violating the Constitution.
As a former sheriff myself, I can tell you, we don't always know how to arrest someone for a constitutional violation. That law is not on our state statute books. And certainly, it's not taught at the police academy.
In our interview, London told us he met Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes during his time in Granbury, but was not a friend of Rhodes or officially part of the Oath Keepers.
I know the premise of the organization, but I can't really speak to them, or I know they had some falling outs, if you will.
But after our interview, we discovered social media posts and videos showing London helped try to launch a local Granbury Oath Keepers chapter. In 2020, he appeared at this rally Oath Keepers followers streamed live.
Yes, I am here representing Oath Keepers. When this is all over, anyone that is an Oath Keepers, meet me under that tree. We're going to have a conversation, all right?
And at a 2020 Hood County Commissioners meeting, London appeared alongside his boss, Constable Chad Jordan, and Constable John Shirley, who was a high-ranking Oath Keepers leader at the time. London announced a donation of riot shields from the Oath Keepers to the county.
With that, I would like to present, on behalf of the Oath Keepers, 2 shields to the constable standing next to me and 10 to the sheriff.
London later told us he did help try to launch an Oath Keepers chapter, but said it never really took off. In conversations, he has insisted that his past involvement with the Oath Keepers and his constitutional sheriff's beliefs are not connected to his investigation of the school libraries. Is that part of a constitutional sheriff or constitutional constable's role?
It has nothing to do with the Constitution.
But some in town are skeptical.
It's scary. It's really scary. You know, seeing that, you know, they're bringing law enforcement, people with that much power into a situation where there shouldn't have even happened.
Lou Whiting leads an LGBTQ student group at Granbury High School and identifies as non-binary. Lou and their mom Angela believe the constables who've spoken out about the books or stepped in to investigate want to impose a conservative Christian agenda on the community while portraying themselves as constitutional advocates.
This is an act of hate put behind that talk of, oh, this is the Constitution. The Constitution tells us to do this.
They say the investigation leaves LGBTQ kids in Granbury wondering if they can trust law enforcement.
What's to say that they now don't have a record of the kids that check these books out? Where does this stop? Where does this end?
Angela says she's also concerned about social media messages Constable Shirley has posted about the LGBTQ community. On Facebook, Shirley posted this image saying, "I won't use someone's pronouns for the same reason I won't talk to a schizophrenic's imaginary friends." In another post, he called gender transition surgery butchery of obviously troubled and confused people, hashtag Frankensteinism. And he posted a message suggesting a church with a rainbow flag was not worshiping the true God.
This is someone that's supposed to be upholding the law, protect and serve.
Angela says the constable has a right to free speech, but worries about messages like this from a law enforcement official.
When they use social media to say things like that, they're basically telling me we're going to protect and serve if we feel like you're deserving of our protection.
Constable Shirley declined our request for an interview, but we tried to speak with him as he left a school board meeting.
Can you explain that? Sir,
You're better than this, Scott.
John, I'm just trying to get an answer to these questions. Can we talk about this? You're an elected official, sir. Don't taxpayers deserve an answer to these questions?
I speak with my constituents regularly. You're not one of my constituents.
We emailed Shirley about his Facebook messages too, but did not hear back. Shortly after our email, his Facebook settings appeared to change, blocking his old posts from public view. In public statements, Shirley has maintained his interest in the library books is simply about protecting kids.
We're not the culture police. We should not be, if you want to live a certain way, that's your choice.
Scott London says his investigation is focused only on whether the books are truly obscene and is not aimed at the LGBTQ community.
We can't investigate lifestyle. Lifestyle is not a crime.
So that's not why you're investigating the books?
I can't discuss it.
Even though London didn't want to discuss the case with us, we found he made a public comment about the books 6 days before his investigation began. On Facebook, he wrote, "When you learn what books are available to 11-year-olds, courtesy of GISD, if you're not offended and enraged, there's something wrong with you. If a civilian were to talk to a child like this, you would be suspected of grooming and pedophilia."
I don't recall making that particular post. I suppose it would have been possible that was after a presentation at the Republican Club, possibly.
London later told us he does remember making that post after hearing Brown and Lowry speak at that Republican Club meeting. But London told us he's reading the books himself to decide if any of them meet the criminal definition of pornography.
Where is the limit? Where do you draw the line? They're even trying to arrest teachers for books in the library.
Zach Maxwell knows London and Shirley. He's run in the same political circles as a conservative Republican and chief of staff to a former Hood County state representative. Maxwell says he's become increasingly concerned the constables and other officials who subscribe to the CSPOA ideology seem to think they can reinterpret the law to fit their own view of the Constitution.
Your viewers have to understand that these people actually believe that they have that kind of power, and that is very dangerous.
He worries they may use that perceived power against those they determine to be domestic enemies of the Constitution.
Who is the enemy? Is it our neighbor? Is it the Democrat across the street? Is it the gay man down the road?
In an interview with us, the founder of the CSPOA, Richard Mack, identified Scott London as a supporter.
Scott London, he's a constable, and he's very, very supportive. He used to be a sheriff in New Mexico.
And of course, Mack and John Shirley go way back to their days as former board members of the Oath Keepers. But Mack would not say whether his group supports law enforcement wading into debates over library books.
Do you support sheriffs and constables getting involved in that issue?
I'm not going to answer that. You have another question pertaining? Because I got to go.
Not long after our interview, Mack announced on his streaming program he's stepping back from running the CSPOA day-to-day so he can work more with America's frontline doctors, which opposes COVID vaccines and restrictions.
I have accepted the position, and it's just going to cut into my CSPOA time. I'm not leaving CSPOA.
He said the CSPOA has been his life, and staff will carry on the mission. Some are wary of where it may lead, especially in places like Granbury. the town that became home to Richard Mack's old friend, Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers.
Once you start to understand the other things that have been happening, Stuart Rhodes landing in a place like Granbury makes more sense.
Those trying to understand Rhodes' legacy and those who met him face to face.
It was shocking, very shocking.
Say they're aware of how a group spreading its own interpretation of the Constitution can lead down a dangerous path.
Now I wish I would have been a little bit more on the nosier side, you know, but, you know, shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
These things grab a hold and very quickly take off in different communities, right, of all different sizes.
A concern echoed by some of those who've studied the ideology.
We've seen this movie before.
And by a man who broke ties with the Oath Keepers and wonders where this goes next.
We may have only a very small period of time to try to stop some of the movement that we're seeing on that front, or it's going to evolve into something that's not going to be good for any of us, except for maybe some very specific demographics.